What happens when a Hollywood icon, someone known for surviving storms both on and off the screen, realizes that a casual laugh on live television has quietly crossed a line she has spent her entire career protecting? Before we go any further, this is the kind of moment that reminds us why conversations still matter, why words still land, why silence can sometimes be louder than outrage, because moments like this don't simply happen. They build, and when they finally surface, they don't whisper. They explode. The studio lights were warm, almost flattering, the kind designed to soften sharp edges and smooth over discomfort. They had a way of making tension look polite, of disguising friction as familiarity. Halle Berry sat at the table with her legs crossed, posture composed, shoulders relaxed but intentional. There was a calm elegance about her, the kind that only comes from decades of navigating rooms where expectations were sharp and forgiveness was rare. She wore a faint smile, the practiced kind, the kind performers learn early in their careers, a smile that says, "I'm fine, I'm listening, I belong here." Around her, the familiar energy of daytime television hummed softly, papers shuffling, a low murmur from the audience, the quiet buzz of anticipation that always lingers just before the red light turns on. Somewhere off camera, a producer's voice faded into silence, then the light blinked red. They were live. Joy Behar leaned forward slightly, glasses perched low on her nose, her signature smile already forming before the question even landed. It was the smile of someone who believed she was about to say something clever, something sharp but safe, something that would earn a chuckle, maybe a ripple of applause, before the show moved seamlessly on. At first, the comment sounded harmless enough, a reference to Hal's long career, a nod to her longevity in an industry that is famously unforgiving to women, especially women who age beyond the comfort of headlines. There were nods around the table, a few approving murmurs from the audience. Hal tilted her head, listening carefully. Her attention wasn't fixed only on Joy's words, but on the rhythm of the room itself, the timing, the tone, the expectation that this would pass without friction. Then Joy added the line. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't openly cruel. It slipped out wrapped in humor, dressed up as a joke. The kind of joke television has relied on for decades, one built on familiarity, on old stereotypes, on the assumption that resilience means silence. A comment about strength, about handling difficult men, about how Hal had learned to deal with it all. But the phrasing landed wrong. It came too close to dismissing the weight of what she had endured. Too close to turning survival into a punchline. Too close to suggesting that toughness erased cost. A ripple of laughter moved through part of the audience. Uncertain, polite, scattered. The kind of laughter people offer when they're not entirely sure they're allowed not to laugh. Hal's smile didn't disappear immediately. Instead, it froze. For half a second, the room felt suspended, like a breath held just a little too long. Hal's eyes dropped briefly to the table, then lifted again, locking onto Joy with a calm that was suddenly very deliberate. Anyone watching closely could see the shift. Her shoulders squared, not defensively, but decisively. This wasn't anger rising. This was clarity settling in. Joy continued, either unaware of the change or too comfortable to notice it. She chuckled at her own remark, adding a quick follow-up, trying to move the moment forward before it had a chance to sit still. But Hal didn't move with her. She exhaled slowly, then leaned forward just enough for the microphones to catch every syllable. "Can I stop you there for a second?" she said softly. The audience quieted, not completely but enough. Even the co-hosts paused, sensing the shift. This wasn't playful interruption. This wasn't banter. Joy blinked, surprised, then waved her hand lightly. "Oh, of course, I'm just kidding, you know. I know." Hal replied, her voice still calm. "And that's actually why I want to say something." The tone wasn't confrontational. It was measured, almost gentle, that somehow made it sharper. Hal folded her hands together on the table, fingers interlaced, grounding herself in the moment. Inside, years of memory pressed against her ribs. Auditions where she was told she was too much and not enough at the same time. Headlines that praised her beauty while quietly questioning her worth. Moments she'd smiled through because correcting them felt exhausting. Moments she'd let slide because survival sometimes meant choosing your battles. She had learned when to let things go. She had also learned when not to. When we laugh about things like that, she continued, it can sound like strength, but sometimes it's actually minimizing what it costs to survive certain spaces. A murmur rippled through the audience, not laughter this time, recognition. Joy shifted in her seat, her smile tightening just slightly. I didn't mean it that way. You know I admire you. I believe that, Hal said, meeting her eyes directly, and I appreciate it. But admiration doesn't mean we can joke about what people had to endure to earn it. One of the co-hosts glanced between them, eyebrows raised. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, expression unreadable, but her eyes stayed locked on Hal, listening closely. The table had gone still. The studio felt heavier now, not tense, but awake. Joy tried again, instinctively reaching for familiar ground. I just meant, you're tough, you handled it. Hal nodded once, acknowledging the sentiment, but not letting it close the conversation. I did, she said, but handling it doesn't mean it didn't matter, and it doesn't mean it didn't leave marks. Silence settled over the set, not uncomfortable, but undeniable. In that moment, the laughter that came before felt distant. Smaller, replaced by something deeper, something real. This wasn't a takedown. This wasn't outrage. It was something far more powerful. It was a boundary drawn calmly, clearly, and live on television, by a woman who had spent her entire career being told where her limits were supposed to be. And this time, she chose to define them herself. Hal nodded once, slow and deliberate. I handled it because I had to, she said calmly, not because it was okay. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed heavy, dense with meaning, settling into the room like weight placed carefully but firmly on a scale. The studio felt different now. The warmth of the lights no longer softened the air. Instead, they sharpened it, illuminating every micro-expression, every shift in posture, every breath drawn a fraction too late. Every camera angle suddenly mattered. Every reaction shot became part of a story unfolding in real time. Hal continued, her voice steady, never rising, never cracking. There was no performance in it, no attempt to dominate the moment. Just truth, delivered with precision. There's a line, she said, between celebrating resilience and normalizing what people shouldn't have to be resilient against. Silence followed, not the polite kind. Not the awkward kind, but real silence, the kind television hates, the kind that can't be edited out, laughed over, or redirected with a quick segue, the kind that forces everyone in the room to sit inside what's just been said. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, the quick comeback didn't arrive on time. The reflexive humor that usually smoothed tension simply didn't fit here. Inside Hal's chest, her heart thudded, not from fear, not from nerves, but from resolve. She wasn't here to embarrass anyone. She wasn't here to scold. She was here because boundaries once drawn mattered, especially when millions were watching. I've spent a long time protecting my peace, Hal added. And that means being honest in moments like this. A few audience members nodded. Someone whispered a little too loudly. It rippled, not as applause, not yet, but as recognition. Joy let out a small laugh, but it lacked its usual confidence. Fair enough, she said lightly, but Hal wasn't done. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just truthfully. I'm happy to talk about my work. She continued, my journey, even my mistakes, but I don't want my survival to be the punchline. That was it. The line was drawn, cleanly, clearly, without theatrics. Applause started slowly, hesitant at first, then it grew. Not thunderous, not performative, but sincere. This wasn't applause for conflict or spectacle. It was applause for clarity, for someone saying out loud what so many people learned to swallow. Joy joined in clapping, nodding along, though her expression betrayed something else beneath the surface. Reflection, perhaps, or discomfort, or both. Whoopi Goldberg finally spoke, her voice grounding the moment. That's real, she said, and that's fair. Hal leaned back slightly, the tension easing from her shoulders just a bit. She offered a small, polite smile, not triumphant, not smug, just settled. The show moved on as live television always does. A breath, a segue, another question, but something fundamental had shifted. The audience could feel it, the hosts could feel it. And somewhere beyond the studio walls, millions of viewers were replaying the moment in their heads, recognizing a boundary they wished they could draw themselves. Hal answered the next question with grace. But her presence carried new weight now, not fragile, not defensive, grounded, intentional. And as the cameras rolled on, one thing became clear. This wasn't about a joke gone wrong. It was about a woman choosing, in real time, how her story would be told. The air never fully returned to normal after that moment. Even as the conversation shifted, even as Joy offered a new question with a lighter tone, something subtle lingered between the chairs at the table. Like a chord that had been struck and refused to fade, Halle Berry answered politely, professionally, but there was a new precision in her words now. Each sentence felt chosen, intentional, as though she were walking carefully through a room she had just realized was full of fragile glass. Joy tried to recover her rhythm. She leaned back, then forward again, hands moving as they always did when she wanted to steer the energy somewhere safer. "So," she said, smiling wider than before, "let's talk about what you're working on now, because you're everywhere again." Hal nodded. "I'm grateful for that," she replied, and she was, but gratitude didn't require silence. The audience sensed that distinction settling into the room. As Hal spoke about her latest project, about choosing roles that reflected who she was now rather than who people expected her to remain, the camera occasionally cut to Joy. Each time, her expression shifted just slightly. Attentive, yes, but also guarded. She laughed at the right moments, but the laughter felt measured now. Like someone walking across ice they hadn't realized was thin until it cracked beneath them. What viewers at home couldn't hear were the tiny sounds in the studio that spoke volumes. A producer's pen tapping against a clipboard, a camera operator adjusting position, a beat too quickly. The audience's reactions now slower, more thoughtful, less automatic. They weren't just watching entertainment anymore. They were witnessing negotiation, boundaries being tested, redrawn, respected, or resisted. Joy jumped in again when Hal paused. "You've always been someone who breaks barriers," she said, clearly aiming for affirmation. "Firsts, milestones. You've carried a lot on your shoulders." Hal met her halfway. "I have," she agreed, "but I don't carry it alone, and I don't carry it quietly anymore." The line wasn't accusatory. It was declarative, and it landed. Sunny shifted in her chair, glancing briefly at Whoopi before speaking. "I think that's something a lot of women relate to," she said. "That moment when you decide you're done, absorbing everything just to keep things comfortable." Hal smiled, genuinely this time. "Exactly." Joy nodded too quickly. Sure, I mean, that's growth, right?" She chuckled. "We're all learning." But Hal's gaze returned to her, calm, steady, unflinching. "We are," she said, "and learning sometimes means unlearning what we thought was harmless." Joy's laugh faded halfway through. The audience responded with a low murmur, approval mixed with unease. This wasn't scripted tension. This was real, time recalibration. Inside Joy's mind, something churned. She'd built a career on sharp humor, on saying the thing others wouldn't, on pushing until someone pushed back. Usually, that pushback came with heat, with raised voices or sarcasm she could spar against. This was different. Hal wasn't sparring. She wasn't performing outrage. She was holding up a mirror and refusing to blink. Joy adjusted her glasses again, a small tell she rarely noticed herself. "I just hope people don't think I was dismissing anything," she said, more to the audience than to Hal. Hal didn't rush to reassure her. That was the most telling part. "I think intent matters," Hal said after a pause, "but impact matters too." Another beat. Another quiet stretch of air. Whoopi cleared her throat. "That's always been true," she said evenly, "and it's something we all have to sit with sometimes." The show moved forward, but now the tension wasn't just between two women. It had spread outward, filling the studio, spilling beyond the cameras, following viewers into their living rooms, because what had happened wasn't confrontation. It was definition, and once a boundary is named out loud, it can't be unseen. The shift in topic softened the room at first, but it didn't dilute the meaning. If anything, it sharpened it. Her voice changed when she mentioned her children, not quieter exactly, but warmer, layered with something deeply personal. It was the voice of someone who had learned that the most important lessons were rarely taught on screens or stages, but in quiet moments at home, long after the cameras were gone. She spoke about raising children in a world that would try to define them before they ever had the chance to define themselves, a world eager to label, to limit, to decide who someone was allowed to be based on surface impressions and inherited assumptions. "I want my kids to know," she said, "that speaking up doesn't make you difficult, it makes you honest." The applause came faster this time, louder, less hesitant. The audience didn't need to think as long before responding. Something about motherhood, about legacy, about teaching the next generation how to claim their voice, resonated immediately. Joy joined in clapping again, nodding along, her smile fixed, but her eyes flicked briefly toward the producer's table. She could feel it now. This moment had grown bigger than a segment, bigger than banter, bigger than control. During a brief pause, as the hosts shuffled their notes and adjusted their papers, Joy leaned slightly toward Hal. Her voice dropped just enough to sound private, though her microphone was still very much on. "I really do respect you," she said quietly. Hal turned toward her. Her expression was unreadable, but not cold. "Not unkind, just steady, I know," she replied, "and respect grows when we listen." The sentence lingered in the air, long after the applause faded. It didn't demand reaction. It didn't seek validation. It simply existed, complete, self-contained, impossible to dismiss. The next question came from Whoopi Goldberg, who had been unusually reserved until now. She leaned forward slightly, her tone thoughtful, measured. "You've been in this industry a long time," Whoopi said. "Do you feel like things are changing, or are we still having the same conversations, just in new packaging?" Hal exhaled softly, considering the weight of the question. This wasn't something that could be answered with optimism alone or cynicism either. It required honesty. "There's progress," she said slowly, "and there's repetition." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing how often people confuse familiarity with permission. Joy stiffened almost imperceptibly. Hal continued, no longer looking directly at Joy now, but out toward the audience, the cameras, the millions of viewers beyond the studio walls. "Just because I've navigated something before," she said, "doesn't mean I want to keep reliving it as entertainment. That was the heart of it, the unspoken truth, finally spoken." The audience's reaction wasn't explosive. There were no gasps, no sudden cheers. Instead, there was something heavier, more reflective. Some people clapped, some didn't. Some sat very still, absorbing what had been said. Joy attempted one last pivot. Her voice was lighter, but there was an edge to it now, something brittle beneath the polish. "Well," she said, "television is all about conversation, and sometimes conversations get messy." "They do," Hal agreed without hesitation. "But messiness doesn't excuse carelessness." There it was again, not anger, not accusation, just a standard being set, calmly, clearly, without apology. By the time the segment wrapped, the smiles around the table felt different. More controlled, more deliberate. Hal hugged each host warmly, professionally. When she reached Joy, the embrace was brief, polite, respectful, boundaried. As Hal walked off the set, the audience applauded. Some stood, some remained seated. All of them knew they had witnessed something rare. Not a blow-up, not a viral shouting match, but a moment where power shifted quietly, unmistakably. Backstage, Hal paused just long enough to breathe. That was when the adrenaline hit, delayed, but real. Her hands trembled slightly before she tucked them into the pockets of her jacket. She stared at the floor for a moment, grounding herself. She knew what moments like this could become once they escaped the room. She'd lived through it before. Headlines would flatten nuance, clips would isolate sentences, opinions would harden fast, people would argue over intent, tone, timing. Some would praise her. Others would accuse her of being too sensitive, too serious, too much. The same patterns over and over again, but she also knew something else. She'd said what needed to be said. In another corner of the building, Joy sat down heavily, the laughter from the segment already feeling distant. She replayed the exchange in her mind, every word, every pause, every moment where she might have steered differently. She wasn't used to being corrected without heat, not used to someone pushing back without performing anger. That unsettled her more than confrontation ever did. She told herself she hadn't meant harm, that humor had always been her language, that conversation was messy by nature, but somewhere beneath the rationalizations, a quieter realization stirred. Intent wasn't the only thing that mattered anymore. As the studio cleared and the lights dimmed, the moment didn't fade. It traveled, through clips, through conversations, through people recognizing themselves in the boundary Hal had drawn. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, especially in front of millions, is simply decide how your story will be told and refuse to laugh when the cost has been too high.